look at you blessing someone when your own life is already miserable. Soon, you will become more miserable and uglier than I am. Crazy old woman.
As Ifeoma and her best friend Uche approached the stream that afternoon, something immediately felt wrong. The environment was unusually quiet. No birds chirping in the trees. No women laughing nearby. No sound of clay pots or children playing. Even the wind itself felt heavy and uncomfortable. Uche slowed down nervously and looked around. "This place feels strange today," she whispered softly. But Ifeoma rolled her eyes carelessly. "You are afraid of everything," she scoffed. Then suddenly, they saw her. An old crippled woman struggling beside the stream. Her back was badly bent, one leg dragged weakly behind her, and beside her sat an empty clay pot. The poor woman stretched her shaking hands toward the water, trying desperately to fetch some, but her weak body could barely move properly. Immediately, Uche rushed forward with pity. "Grandmother, let me help you." But suddenly, Ifeoma grabbed her arm harshly. "Wait." Uche turned in confusion. "What are you doing?" A wicked smile slowly spread across Ifeoma's face. "Watch me." Uche's heart skipped immediately. "Ifeoma, do not do anything foolish." The old woman looked up hopefully the moment she saw Ifeoma approaching. "My daughter, please help me fetch water." The moment she called her "my daughter," Ifeoma's face darkened instantly. Without saying a word, she snatched the clay pot from the old woman, fetched water slowly, filled the pot completely, then suddenly poured the entire water directly on the old woman's body. The old woman gasped loudly in shock as cold water soaked her completely. "Ifeoma!" Uche screamed in horror. But Ifeoma pointed angrily at the helpless woman. "Do not ever call me your daughter again." The old woman opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, Ifeoma fetched another pot of water and poured it on her again. This time, the old woman nearly fell to the ground. Uche quickly rushed forward and held her carefully. "What is wrong with you?" she cried angrily. Then she knelt immediately. "Please forgive her, grandmother." Uche gently used her wrapper to dry the old woman's body while the woman stared silently at her. Then softly, she spoke. "You are kind. You will see goodness in life." But suddenly, Ifeoma burst into loud mocking laughter. "Look at you blessing someone when your own life is already miserable." Immediately, the atmosphere changed. The wind blew violently around them. The old woman slowly turned toward Ifeoma, and her eyes suddenly became terrifying. Her voice no longer sounded ordinary. "Soon," she said slowly, "you will become more miserable and uglier than I am." Uche froze in fear instantly, but Ifeoma only laughed carelessly. "Crazy old woman." Then she turned proudly and walked away while the old woman stood there silently watching her disappear. Hi besties, before we continue this emotional story filled with deep lessons, kindly subscribe to support this channel, and now come with me as I take you deeper into this heartbreaking story of pride, pain, and redemption. In the days when moonlight stories filled the night air and elders gathered children under the trees to teach them wisdom, there lived a young girl named Ifeoma. From the very day she was born, she became the center of her parents' entire world. Her mother, Ngozi, had suffered many painful years without a child. Women whispered behind her back whenever they gathered together. Some secretly called her barren. Others mocked her husband, Okeke, saying his lineage would end with him. Many nights, Ngozi cried herself to sleep while Okeke sat beside her helplessly. "My wife," he would whisper softly, "one day God will remember us." Ngozi visited medicine women. She drank bitter herbs. She prayed endlessly. She fasted until her body became weak. Then one miraculous day, after years of tears and disappointment, Ngozi finally became pregnant. The news spread everywhere. Finally became pregnant. The news spread everywhere like wildfire. Their family celebrated with overwhelming joy. Even people who once mocked them suddenly became friendly. And when Ifeoma was finally born, her parents believed heaven itself had visited their home. The child was extraordinarily beautiful. Her skin glowed like morning sunlight. Her eyes were sharp and bright. And whenever she smiled, people forgot their worries instantly. Even as a little child, strangers stopped walking just to admire her beauty. "Chai, this child is too beautiful," women would say. Okeke carried his daughter proudly everywhere he went as though she was a precious crown. Ngozi treated her like fragile gold. But after Ifeoma's birth, no other child came. Years passed quietly. Ngozi tried herbs again. Visited different healers. Prayed endlessly. But nothing happened. Eventually, both parents accepted that Ifeoma was their only child. And from that moment, they made a dangerous mistake. They poured every drop of love into her without discipline. They never corrected her. Never punished her. Never denied her anything. If Ifeoma cried for something, she got it immediately. If another child offended her, Okeke would storm angrily to the child's house to fight the parents. If she insulted an elder, Ngozi defended her shamelessly. "Leave my daughter alone," Ngozi would always say proudly. "She is still young. She does not know what she is doing." But Ifeoma knew exactly what she was doing. And slowly, pride entered her heart. As she grew older, her beauty became even more noticeable. Young girls admired her. Young men stared at her secretly. Old women praised her appearance endlessly. But beneath the beauty was a terrible character. Ifeoma became rude, arrogant, disrespectful, and extremely proud. Unlike other girls her age, she never swept the compound. Never washed plates. Never fetched water. Never cooked. Whenever Ngozi asked her to help with chores, Ifeoma would immediately complain. "My mother, do you want to suffer me?" And before long, Ngozi would push her away gently. "Leave it for me, my daughter. I will do it myself." Meanwhile, Ifeoma spent most of her time admiring herself. She mocked hard-working girls openly. She laughed at poor people carelessly. And worst of all, she insulted elders without fear. One afternoon, an elderly woman greeted her kindly. "Good afternoon, my daughter." But Ifeoma looked at the woman rudely and replied, "Do I look like your mate?" The woman froze in shock immediately. Another day, an elderly man corrected her publicly after she insulted a younger girl. Instead of apologizing, Ifeoma snapped at him angrily. "You are old already. Go and sleep instead of disturbing young people." The entire village became stunned. People complained constantly to her parents. But Okeke always defended her stubbornly. "She is still a child. She will change. Do not curse my daughter." Meanwhile, Ngozi secretly enjoyed hearing people praise Ifeoma's beauty. Pride blinded both parents completely. And because nobody disciplined Ifeoma, her wickedness continued growing day after day. In those days, when people still believed that a good friend could either save a life or destroy it, there was only one person who remained truly close to Ifeoma despite her terrible behavior. Her best friend, Uche. Uche was everything Ifeoma was not. She was kind, gentle, respectful, hardworking. While other people avoided Ifeoma because of her rude mouth, Uche stayed beside her faithfully like a sister. Whenever and Uche. Uche was everything Ifeoma was not. She was kind, gentle, respectful, hardworking. While other people avoided Ifeoma because of her rude mouth, Uche stayed beside her faithfully like a sister. Whenever Ifeoma insulted people publicly, it was always Uche who ran after them to apologize. Whenever she mocked elders carelessly, Uche tried her best to correct her. But Ifeoma hated correction deeply. One evening, after insulting an elderly widow publicly at the market square, Uche finally confronted her as they walked home together. "Ifeoma," Uche said quietly, One day this behavior will bring trouble. Immediately, Ifeoma stopped walking and turned angrily toward her. Do not correct me again, she snapped. I know what I am doing. You are behaving as if you are my mother. Uche sighed deeply in frustration. You cannot continue talking to elders like this, she said softly. It is not good. But Ifeoma only laughed mockingly. What will they do to me? She asked proudly. Nothing. My parents love me. That statement frightened Uche deeply. Because at that moment, she realized Ifeoma truly believed she was untouchable. Days later, one hot afternoon, Ngozi discovered there was no water left in the house. She wiped sweat from her face tiredly and called out loudly. Ifeoma. From inside the room, Ifeoma answered lazily. What is it again? Ngozi forced a smile gently. My daughter, please go to the stream and fetch water. Immediately, Ifeoma frowned in irritation. No. Ngozi looked shocked. My daughter, please. I am tired. But Ifeoma crossed her arms stubbornly. I said no. Ngozi tried persuading her gently again. You are no longer a little child. But Ifeoma hissed loudly and looked away carelessly. At that exact moment, Uche entered the compound carrying a small basket. The moment she noticed the tension, she quickly understood what was happening. I will go with her, Uche volunteered immediately. Ifeoma rolled her eyes dramatically. See stress, she muttered under her breath. Ngozi quickly held her hand pleadingly. Please go. Just this once. After much persuasion and endless complaining, Ifeoma finally agreed reluctantly. The two girls carried clay pots and began walking toward the stream together. But throughout the journey, Ifeoma refused to stop complaining. Why should I be fetching water like a poor person? She grumbled angrily. Uche laughed softly. Fetching water will not reduce your beauty. But Ifeoma hissed loudly and adjusted the pot on her waist proudly. You would not understand. Ifeoma and her friend Uche continued their journey toward the stream that hot afternoon. But as they drew closer, something immediately felt strange. The environment was unusually quiet. No birds chirping in the trees. No women laughing as they washed clothes. No sound of gossip or clay pots knocking against each other. Even the wind itself felt heavy and uncomfortable. Uche slowed down nervously and looked around carefully. This place feels strange today, she whispered softly. But Ifeoma ignored her completely. You are afraid of everything, she scoffed carelessly. Then suddenly, they saw her. An old crippled woman struggling beside the stream. Her back was bent terribly. One leg dragged weakly behind her. Her wrapper looked old and faded from years of suffering. Beside her sat an empty clay pot. The poor woman stretched her shaking hands toward the water, trying desperately to fetch some, but her weak body could barely move properly. Immediately, Uche's heart melted with pity. Chai, poor grandmother, she murmured sadly as she rushed forward. Grandmother, let me help you. But suddenly, Ifeoma grabbed Uche's arm harshly. Wait. Uche turned in confusion immediately. What are you doing? A wicked smile slowly spread across Ifeoma's face. Watch me. Fear entered Uche's eyes instantly. Ifeoma, do not do anything foolish. But Ifeoma ignored her completely and walked slowly toward the old woman. The crippled woman looked up hopefully the moment she saw her approaching. Relief immediately entered her tired eyes. My daughter, the old woman said weakly, please help me fetch water. The moment she called her my daughter, Ifeoma's face darkened instantly. Without speaking, she snatched the clay pot aggressively from the old woman's hands. The old woman smiled weakly, believing help had finally come. Uche stood behind nervously, praying silently that her friend would behave herself. Ifeoma walked slowly to the stream. Fetched water carefully. Filled the pot completely. The old woman smiled gratefully. But suddenly, Whoosh! Ifeoma poured the entire water directly on the old woman's body. The old woman gasped loudly in shock as cold water soaked her completely. Ifeoma! Uche screamed in horror. The old woman trembled helplessly while water dripped from her weak body. But Ifeoma only pointed angrily at her. "Do not ever call me your daughter again." The old woman opened her mouth to speak quickly. But before she could finish, Ifeoma fetched another pot of water and poured it on her again. This time, the force nearly pushed the old woman to the ground. Uche rushed forward immediately in fear. "What is wrong with you?" she cried angrily. She quickly held the old woman carefully before she fell completely. Then Uche knelt down immediately. "Please forgive her, grandmother." Tears filled her eyes as she gently used her wrapper to dry the old woman's soaked body. The old woman stared silently at Uche for a long moment. Then softly, she spoke. "You are kind. You will see goodness in life." But suddenly, Ifeoma burst into loud mocking laughter. "Look at you," she said cruelly. "You are blessing someone when your own life is miserable." Immediately, the atmosphere changed. The wind began blowing strangely around them. The trees moved violently. The old woman slowly turned toward Ifeoma, and suddenly her eyes became terrifying. Cold. Deep. Unnatural. Even her voice changed completely. "Soon," she said slowly, "you will become more miserable and uglier than I am." A strange wind swept across the stream immediately. Uche froze in fear instantly. But Ifeoma only laughed carelessly and rolled her eyes. "Crazy old woman." Then she turned proudly and walked away without looking back. Before leaving, Uche bowed respectfully once more. "Please forgive her," she whispered fearfully. But the old woman said nothing again. She only stood there silently, watching Ifeoma disappear into the distance. Days passed peacefully after the incident at the stream. Slowly, life returned to normal. Ifeoma forgot times. She remembered the terrifying way the old woman's voice changed. Other times, she remembered her cold eyes and the strange wind that blew around the stream. And each time she remembered those words, fear entered her heart again. "Soon, you will become more miserable and uglier than I am." One evening, dark clouds suddenly gathered across the sky. The air became cold and restless. Inside the house, Ngozi was arranging some things when she noticed something she needed outside. "Ifeoma," she called gently. From inside her room, Ifeoma answered lazily. "What is it?" "Please bring that basket outside for me." Ifeoma hissed softly in annoyance but finally stood up. As she walked toward the entrance of the house carelessly, her foot suddenly stepped on water that had mistakenly spilled on the ground earlier. Everything happened so fast. Sleep. Oh. Her body flew violently backward. Then, crack. Her head struck the hard ground with a horrifying sound. A terrible scream filled the compound instantly. Ngozi dropped everything immediately. "Ifeoma." Okeke rushed outside in panic. Both parents froze in horror the moment they saw their daughter lying motionless on the ground. Blood slowly trickled from the side of her head. Ngozi screamed uncontrollably and fell beside her daughter. "My child. My child." Okeke quickly lifted Ifeoma frantically while neighbors rushed into the compound from every direction. People gathered immediately. Fear spread everywhere. The same proud, beautiful girl who once walked around like a queen now lay helpless like a broken child. That same night, a medicine man was called urgently. He examined Ifeoma carefully while the entire house waited anxiously. But as the old man touched her back gently, his expression suddenly became dark. Ngozi's heart trembled immediately. "What is it?" she asked fearfully. The medicine man sighed heavily. "She broke her backbone." Ngozi collapsed to the ground crying loudly. Okeke immediately held the old man desperately. "Please save my daughter," he begged with tears in his eyes. The medicine man explained that the treatment would be very painful. Her beautiful hair would have to be shaved completely. Special herbs would be applied to her head and spine. Then his voice became even heavier. And she may never walk again. The entire house became filled with sorrow immediately. Ngozi cried day and night until her eyes became swollen. Okeke moved around like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The same girl who once mocked crippled people was now unable to stand on her own. The same girl who admired her beauty endlessly lost her glorious hair completely. Her once glowing face became pale and weak. Her body grew thinner every day. And every night, painful screams echoed from her room. "Oh, my back. Please help me." People whispered outside quietly. Some remembered all the cruel things Ifeoma had done. Others simply pitied her deeply. Meanwhile, Uche remained by her side faithfully. Even after all the insults and fights, she refused to abandon her friend. She visited constantly, fed Ifeoma patiently, cleaned her body gently, and comforted Ngozi whenever the woman broke down crying. One painful night, Ifeoma stared at her reflection weakly and burst into tears. "I am ugly now," she cried bitterly. "My beauty is gone." Uche sat beside her quietly and held her trembling hand gently. "No," she whispered softly. "You are still alive." But secretly, as Uche looked at her suffering friend, she remembered the old crippled woman's curse once again. And fear slowly entered her heart. Okeke spent huge amounts of money searching desperately for anyone who could heal his daughter. Different medicine men arrived at the house one after another. Some brought powerful herbs. Others performed strange rituals. But nothing worked. Others performed strange rituals. But nothing worked. Different herbalists came from far places. Still, nothing changed. Instead, Ifeoma only became weaker with each passing day. Her body grew thinner. Her voice became weaker. And every night, painful cries echoed through the compound. One evening, as Ngozi sat beside her daughter crying quietly, Uche finally gathered the courage to speak. "There is something I never told you," she said softly. Ngozi looked at her immediately. "What is it?" Uche hesitated briefly, then slowly narrated everything that happened at the stream that day. Every insult. Every wicked action. Every cruel word Ifeoma spoke to the old crippled woman. And finally, every word of the terrifying curse. As Uche spoke, Ngozi's face slowly became pale with fear. Okeke stood frozen in complete shock. For the very first time, both parents realized that their daughter's behavior had truly destroyed her life. Ngozi burst into tears immediately. "This is our fault," she cried painfully. Okeke covered his face in shame. The next morning, they hurried to visit the village dibia. The old man listened silently without interrupting them once. Then slowly, he closed his eyes deeply. The room became silent. Several moments passed before he finally spoke. The crippled woman was not ordinary. Ngozi's body trembled instantly. "She was a spirit," the dibia continued heavily. "And your daughter offended her greatly." Ngozi began shaking uncontrollably. The old man looked directly at them. "You spoiled your daughter until pride consumed her. You protected her instead of correcting her. Now her pride has broken her." Okeke broke down openly. Tears rolled freely down his face. "What do we do?" he begged desperately. The dibia sighed deeply before answering. "You must return to the stream. You must beg sincerely. Only mercy can save her now." The next morning felt heavy with fear and sorrow. Okeke and Ngozi carefully carried weak Ifeoma toward the stream. Uche followed silently behind them. Nobody spoke throughout the journey. When they finally reached the stream, the old crippled woman was there again. Exactly where they first saw her. Immediately, Uche fell flat to the ground respectfully. Ngozi and Okeke followed instantly. Both parents cried bitterly. Please forgive our daughter, Ngozi sobbed painfully. We failed as parents. We spoiled her. We are sorry. Weak and trembling, Ifeoma could barely lift her head. Tears rolled endlessly down her face. I am sorry, she cried softly. Please forgive me. The old woman stared silently at all of them for a long moment. Then finally, she spoke slowly. When parents refuse to discipline a child, the world would discipline that child instead. Ngozi cried even harder. The old woman continued. You loved her wrongly. You protected her from correction. And pride entered her heart. Then she slowly turned toward Ifeoma. Beauty without humility becomes ugliness. The entire stream became silent immediately. Only the sound of flowing water could be heard softly in the distance. Finally, the old woman sighed deeply. I forgive you. Immediately, a strange calmness filled the air around them. The wind blew softly and her eyes widened in shock. Slowly, carefully, she stood up. Everyone gasped loudly. Ngozi screamed with overwhelming joy. Okeke burst into uncontrollable tears immediately. Uche covered her mouth in complete shock. Even Ifeoma herself could not believe what was happening. Crying heavily, she fell before the old woman. Thank you. Thank you. But when she slowly lifted her head again, the old woman was gone. Completely gone. Only the sound of flowing water remained beside the silent stream. From that day onward, Ifeoma changed completely. The proud and arrogant girl people once feared slowly disappeared. And in her place, a humble young woman emerged. For the very first time in her life, Ifeoma began helping her mother with chores around the house. She swept the compound happily, fetched water without complaining, cooked with Ngozi in the kitchen. And whenever elders greeted her, she bowed respectfully. People could hardly believe the transformation. Some even whispered among themselves in shock. Is this truly Ifeoma? The same girl who once insulted everyone now went from house to house apologizing publicly to people she had offended. Please forgive me, she would say with tears in her eyes. I was proud and foolish. But the greatest change of all was how she treated Uche. One quiet evening, the two friends sat together outside while the cool evening breeze blew softly around them. Ifeoma suddenly held Uche's hand emotionally. You never abandoned me, she said tearfully. Uche smiled warmly. That is what true friendship means. Tears filled Ifeoma's eyes immediately. Because for the first time in her life, she realized that the people she once ignored were the ones who truly loved her. As years passed, Ifeoma slowly became known for something nobody expected. Wisdom. She began teaching younger girls about humility and kindness. She warned parents against spoiling their children excessively. And she shared her painful story openly everywhere she went. Many people listened carefully because they remembered the kind of person she used to be. One afternoon, a young girl insulted an elderly woman publicly. Instead of laughing, Ifeoma walked toward her gently. Do not let pride destroy your future, she said softly. The young girl immediately lowered her head in shame and apologized. Eventually, people began inviting Ifeoma to speak to young people across different communities. Her story spread everywhere. Not because she was once beautiful, but because she learned humility through pain. Years later, one peaceful afternoon, Ifeoma stood once again beside the same stream where her life had changed forever. Then suddenly, she noticed an elderly woman struggling with a clay pot. Without hesitation, Ifeoma rushed forward immediately with a warm smile. Grandmother, let me help you. As she helped the old woman fetch water gently, Uche stood nearby watching proudly with a smile on her face. Then slowly, the moment faded quietly as Ifeoma's voice echoed softly. Kindness costs nothing. But pride can cost everything.